So, so today we're fortunate to have Jennifer Yeaman with us. Jennifer is a partner at Full Circle Strategies, LLC, with over 20 years of experience in public service. She has presented at local workshops and national Native conferences, sharing insights on individual development plans, change management, and diversity and inclusion. She holds a Master of Public Administration in Tribal Governments, Certified Diversity Practitioner certification, and recently attained her Lean Master Black Belt certification. Congratulations. Aside from work, Jennifer enjoys volunteering, golfing, traveling, and seeing her family grow. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Jennifer.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome from our host. Thank you so much for Results Washington for all the planning that you do and for hosting this event yearly. And a big thank you to all the attendees who are online today, and especially during this hour, which is usually after lunch. So I know you're putting in extra effort. All right, I'm going to share my screen. It always works good in the practice. Let's see if it still works good live. All right. So welcome to the session. Before we officially get started, this session does include a participant activity, and I wanted to provide additional time to collect the items needed to participate. Participation is completely optional. It's not required. There will be two options to participate, with paper or electronically. To participate with paper, you will need a piece of paper 8.5 inches by 11 inches or smaller, and that's usually your standard piece of printer paper. You'll also need a writing instrument. This can be a pencil, a pen, a crayon, whatever works for you, your preference. To participate electronically, you'll need some type of electronic notepad. This can be a Microsoft Word document, Google Docs, PowerPoint, Notepad, whatever it is, as long as it can be sized 8.5 by 11 inches. There's also a workshop handout that explains the activity and materials if you need that prep ahead of time. Welcome again, and thank you for your time, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Power of the Pilot session officially. How many of you have ever struggled to try to get people to try new things? Or maybe it's yourself, you're struggling to try new things, especially in government or public service. If you've ever worked with people, you might have come across this issue, this challenge. And working in public service in general, this can be a daily challenge. So in this session, we will be learning how to use pilots to nurture change. We'll first be learning a little bit about what pilots are. We'll discuss real-world examples, and by the end of the session, you'll be able to evaluate for yourself the benefits of pilots and if there's something that's for you. So let's start with some of the definitions. So this session is titled The Power of the Pilot, but today we'll also be discussing prototypes and iterative development. I know the session title is Power of the Pilot, but Power of the Pilot, Prototypes, and Iterative Development would have been a super long workshop title. But these tools are all related and they all help to demonstrate proof of concept. They help to nurture engagement, gather feedback, and also nurture learning. And these are all valuable tools for engagement and innovation, and especially change. So let's start with defining the workshop namesake, pilot. So when we talk about pilots, we're not talking about the people that navigate our flights or our airplanes. Pilots are small-scale controlled experiments that test a new process, product, or service. Pilots help to assess feasibility, gather feedback, and make adjustments before final implementation. At some point in our lives, we have probably experienced a pilot for ourselves. A recent example I have is attending a preview of the musical The Notebook. The preview allowed the director and the crew to present the entire musical in front of an audience and identify problems and opportunities for improvement that were not found during the rehearsals. The preview period also allows the team to make adjustments before the musical officially opens to a general audience, and especially the critics. Other examples are restaurant soft openings. These are when restaurants invite people to come dine at their establishments prior to their grand openings. This helps to test out their operations. And the last everyday example is maybe running a science fair experiment, maybe either for yourself or for a child, niece, nephew, relative. In a science fair experiment, people create a hypothesis of what they think will happen, and then they run a trial to see what actually happens, and then we compare the results. These are all everyday examples, something you may have experienced, but you can think back to other examples for yourself and see if they fall in the realm of that pilot definition. But the biggest benefit to pilots is allowing people on the ease to lean into change. In the past, I brought up an idea to a supervisor and I come to them and I let them know I had a change I wanted to implement or a change that the team wanted to implement. I'd come up to them and I'd be like, hey, I want to implement this change. And I would use those words exactly. Using that wording, I would get immediate no or pushback. So I learned to use a different type of phrasing. Like, well, I don't want to implement a change. I just want to run a pilot. Just using that nuanced language really helped them to get to the yes instead of just running to that first no. So I let them know I wanted to test out this idea short term just to see how it works. I'd use a charter to charter it so we were all legal and especially run it by the union in my case, which was required. And more times than not, I would get the go ahead and try it out versus running into the no. So our next definition are prototypes. Prototypes are early model versions of products or representations of a proposed solution. Sometimes it's not always a physical thing. Sometimes it's a mock-up of an idea. So these early models are mock-ups. They're lower cost products. They enable rapid testing and learning. And they also allow organizations to quickly validate ideas and gather user feedback. These models also allow changes to be made prior to committing to a final product and final larger scale productions. So some everyday examples of prototypes. 3D printing models are a really good example of prototype generation. In the past, I've worked for industrial field. If I needed to test out a special tool or create a special tool, we could quickly create it using a 3D printer. We could go back to the work site, test it out to see if it'll work. Once we got the final idea figured out, we can make it out of a stronger material versus having to commit to the time to create this tool up front, which we knew we might have to change anyways. Another example local to me, I won't give their name, but a national cookie company has a test kitchen in my area. This means I get to purchase cookie flavors and other dessert products that aren't available nationally. This also allows the company to test out flavors or desserts which may be popular in my area and using that as a sample before evaluating whether to test them or to launch them nationally. So pilots and prototypes are powerful tools for learning, enabling organizational change. Again, they help get a change implemented or at least tried, gets you past the no, provides a proof of concept that people can see, touch, taste, test, and break sometimes. It provides improvement data right away, and it provides the opportunity to get user input and feedback right away as well. And all these are quick wins that help maintain momentum and help people lean into change. All right. Last is iterative development. So iterative development and learning goes in cycles, and there's also a structure to it. So when it comes to iterative development, initial planning is performed to understand what goal or outcome is needed. After the outcome or goal is understood, each iteration goes through a plan, do, checked, or adjust cycle. So with iterative development, its approach where solutions are continuously refined based on feedback and allow us to grow in our learning. During the plan phase, we create our action plan and decide what tasks are needed to be done done to achieve the objective. And then the next step is do. And in this step, we are able to put our plan into action. The next step is check. This is where we evaluate our results and compare the outcomes to our objective. And then the last step is act or adjust. In this step, we identify what needs to be corrected to mitigate any failures or identify improvements in your cycle. So for short, you may hear PDCA. So that is what the PDA stands for. Plan, do, check. And some people say act, and some people say adjust. So those 4 steps. During the PDA cycle, we test out our process or create a prototype. And this cycle can be repeated a number of times before official implementation. So if you worked with me enough and you've already seen my first example on food, I have a lot of process improvement examples that relate to food, and this session is no different. So on this slide, we have 3 pictures of desserts: a vanilla cupcake, a rose raspberry cupcake, and a layered chocolate and vanilla parfait. But there's a reason for it. So I live in Washington State, and I was heading to California for a family member's 70th birthday party. We were all going to help, chip in potluck style and bring a dish. I was trying to figure out what I was going to make. So for initial planning, using iterative development, I checked in with my sister to see what the theme of the party was and thought about what I could bring to the party. So I found out the colors were rose, gold, and brown, and I need to make enough desserts to serve 50 people. So during pre-planning, I also knew I would be staying with my dad in California, and I know our kitchens are not supplied the same. So before I left Washington State to go to my dad's in California, I wanted to make sure that I prepped everything I needed and that I would be able to deliver these desserts to the party. So I moved forward with iterative development and piloted my process here in Washington State to make sure I was good to go before leaving. In my first iteration, I got all my ingredients together and I made a basic vanilla cupcake with frosting. It went pretty smooth because I used a boxed cupcake mix and an off-the-shelf frosting. But after looking at the product, it looked pretty basic for a 70th birthday party. So with the internet videos and TikTok, I was feeling pretty confident I could do a little fancier raspberry-filled cupcake with the fresh whipped topping and little raspberries on top. So I got all my ingredients together and I got to work. I quickly learned that I was a little bit overconfident and that dessert was not in my baking ability. I did get a product out, but it definitely didn't look like what was on the video screen, and it definitely did not look like the picture that was on the screen today. On the screen, it shows a cupcake evenly frosted with pink frosting. My cupcakes were frosted lopsided, but the lopsided frosting did hide the poor job I did of filling the cupcakes with raspberry jam. So thinking forward to the day of the party, I would also have to transport these cupcakes in California traffic across a mountain pass. I knew if these cupcakes were already looking lopsided before I started, I could just imagine what they were going to look like in stop and go traffic and my panic driving. So thinking about my dad's kitchen, thinking about my ability for baking, thinking about the forgiveness of any visual imperfections I was going to have, I decided I was going to make a layered chocolate parfait. I already had all the baking tools. I've made them before. I knew the baking process, and it matched my baking skill level. So thinking about, we've learned about pilots, we've learned about prototype, we've learned about iterative development, and we've also saw how iterative development ties to my poor baking skills. Before we get on to a activity where you can test out iterative development for yourself, I wanted to check in the Q&A and see if there was any questions.
Hi, Jennifer. No questions in the Q&A, just one statement, wondering how I get that job. So a lot of good luck.
The baking job or the tasting job?
I think it was the tasting job.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to, I think I see some more maybe in the Q&A. I'll just do one last check before I move on to the activity.
So we have one question that says, can we use Word for our activity? And another question that says, can they use a smaller piece of paper than an 8.5 by 11?
Perfect. Great intro. The answer to both of those is yes.
Great.
You can use Word or you can use a smaller piece of paper. All right. So far we've discussed the definition of pilots and prototypes. We've talked about PDCA, my baking skills, how to get into the tasting business. Here comes the interactive part. So if you would like to participate, you will need the materials we discussed earlier. If you missed the discussion at the beginning of the session, there's two options to participate in this activity, either paper or electronically. You'll need an 8.5 by 11-inch sheet of paper or smaller. That'll work too. You'll need a writing instrument, a pencil, pen, crayon, whatever works for you. If you want to participate electronically, you'll need an electronic notepad. It can be a Microsoft Word doc, Google Docs, PowerPoint, anything that you can use, as long as it can be sized to 8.5 by 11 inches or smaller. And I'm going to assume it's charged too. If you didn't have time to prep and you don't have any of these things around, just use whatever is safe and nearby, because it's a pilot after all. And this is an experiment and a safe to learn environment as well. All right. So here is the assignment. We're going to have an activity where we pilot a pilot and a prototype. So we're going to be using iterative development to create a thank you card using the material kit of your choice, whether it's a paper version, electronic version, or if you found some other option that's going to work for today. We're going to complete the following assignment. You're being asked to create a thank you card for whoever sponsored your time to attend the Washington State Lean Conference, whether it's a supervisor, employer, maybe a friend hyped you up to come here, whoever it is. If this scenario doesn't apply to you, feel free to choose a recipient and a thank you reason of your choice. Maybe it was to a family member for a party gift you received, whatever works for you. So we're going to be using the iterative process we discussed earlier. We're going to be performing initial planning. We're going to use plan, do, check, and or adjust. And we'll go through one cycle. So going through iterative development, for initial planning, the has been done in the background. So I've already given you like requirements for things. At the minimum, the card must be 8.5 inches by 11 inches or smaller. Your card must express thanks, whatever it is that means to you, and it must have 0 spelling errors. Everything else is up to you, but at a minimum, it must have these things. Because even as we go through a pilot or prototype, we still want to make sure we adhere to some quality characteristics, and we also want to make sure it fits the need. So again, we have that upfront pre-planning. Once we have that done, we're going to go through that PDA cycle again. So in the next couple of steps, you're going to get the opportunity to plan, do, check, and or adjust. So you're going to get the opportunity to plan. You'll get 1 minute to plan out your card. At this point, please no doing yet, only planning. Then we're going to go to do. You're going to get 2 minutes to actually create your card. After that, we'll go to check. We'll take 1 minute to check your product against the initial planning criteria at 8.5 by 11 inches or smaller. Must express thanks, have 0 errors. We'll compare what we did to what the requirements were in the check. And then the last step is act and adjust. We will take another minute to see what we learned or see if we are ready to launch. Those are the steps we're going to go through in this activity. I'm going to just take a moment to check a Q&A to see if there's any questions before we start.
Hi, Jennifer, no questions.
Okay, perfect. All right. So step number 1, plan. And again, I have the requirements on there, the assignment, in case you have a memory like me where I need to write everything down or I need to see it, it's there for you. So the first step is plan. You'll get 1 minute to plan. And again, please no doing at this point. I will put the timer on. Some things to think about. I know what are some of the ideas you have and what are some of the steps that you'll need to do to accomplish it. And again, no doing at this point. Your 1 minute begins now. All right. The 1 minute is up. The pencil's up. Or keyboard's up. Time's up for that section. All right. And in our next step, we are going to get to do. You're going to have 2 minutes to actually create your card. And let me get the timer up here. All right, your 2 minutes starts. Go ahead and create your card. All right, and we're at the halfway minute mark. 1 minute left to finish creating your card. All right, put those final touches on there. All right, and we're at time. Pencils. So at this point, we've done our initial planning. We figured out what the minimum requirements are. We had the opportunity to do some planning, thought about some ideas that we had for our card. We thought about what steps or tasks it would take to get our card created. And we had the opportunity to do. We had the opportunity to create our card. So now we're at the C, we're at the check portion. And we're going to take 1 minute to check our product against the initial planning. So we're going to look at our cards. Does our card meet the minimum requirements? Is it 8.5 inches or smaller? Does your card express thanks? Does it have any spelling errors? And maybe if you have people around you, maybe ask them to review your card. What do they think? Does it meet the right criteria? And we're going to take 1 minute. Let me get my timer up here. All right, and your 1 minute starts now. Check your product against the criteria. All right, final seconds. Pencils up or keyboard up. Time's up. All right, and then the last step of PDCA is act or adjust. So we're going to take a minute to see what we learned. We checked our card against the criteria, and we're going to see if we're ready to launch. For some of us, maybe we had some mistakes or some spelling errors that didn't match the criteria of 0 errors. So that would be a defect that we would need to fix. So we might need to go back and see how we're going to fix that and do another iteration. Maybe after looking at our card, we thought about some other ideas for improvement as well. But at this point, we're going to take a minute to see what we learned, see if we're ready to launch. Some things we can think about during this time. After reviewing your card, is there anything you would do differently next time? If there's a person around, are they able to give you feedback on improvements? Are you ready to give it to the recipient? If not, what else would you change? So we'll take one more minute and go ahead and think about ideas for improvement or ideas to resolve any defects. And your 1 minute starts now. Either that was a quick minute or I missed something there. The time went by fast virtually today. All right, so pencils up, act or adjust. Thinking about your own card, but this time you've had the opportunity to check in and see what things you would change. You have some ideas on what you would like to do, what you would like to improve, or how to resolve any defects. At this point, you could decide if you need another iteration, do you want to keep going for another cycle? Or you can decide that you're just ready to give this card to somebody and it's good as is. So at this point, you have survived your first iterative development routine or exercise. In consideration of our limited time for today, we only went through one iteration as a group, but I simulated some other scenarios so we could see what could have been done. So in the first version, version A, I went through my first PDA cycle. In my first revision, I had a simple thank you in block letters. After looking at it, going through that PDCA cycle, I decided on some changes and I would want to do a second iteration. So in my second iteration, I thought I would get a little fancy by changing the wording from thank you to thank you for your support. I also thought during my planning that I would change the text color to like a brown. And I also thought that I would change the font style to cursive, which resulted in revision B. When I tested revision B out on my son, he's from a different generation than me, and he let me know that he could not read cursive. So this gave me feedback for revision C. I know that I had some defects and some people wouldn't be able to read it. So in my final iteration, I went back to the block letters and I just simplified it. I still had that little bit of color, but instead of having a brown font, I changed the font to black. And I included a background of colorful flowers. So this was my final product ready for implementation, and it only took 3 iterations. So in this activity, we not only created thank you card to show gratitude for our Washington State Conference attendance, or maybe whoever supported us in a different scenario, but we also ran a pilot on piloting a pilot, and we also created a prototype. So we're able to try-storm it, learn how to do that. And we did this all by using iterative development. So earlier we discussed some of the benefits with iterative development, pilots and prototypes, helping to get a change implemented or at least tried. So we saw that today. If you're able to participate, you're able to try it out, create a proof of concept that people can see, touch, test, and break. If you were able to participate in the exercise, you created something that people could see, touch, test, and break in some cases, like my son breaking my cursive. We received improvement data. Again, like my son giving me feedback that he couldn't read something. We created something right away, helped gain a quick win. We could see that we could make change happen, which helps with momentum. And as a bonus, you have an exercise that maybe you can take back to your organizations as well. Right, so that was a lot of words from our little introvert heart. Let's check the Q&A. Let's see if we have any questions.
Hi, we just have one comment that says, this feels a lot like design thinking or human-centered design. Iterate quickly.
I think that is a great comparison. You definitely get empathy from your users right away. You definitely design with the end in mind, and thinking about our users during the planning cycle and creation cycle. So I think that's a great comparison. And I'm going to steal that too. Another benefit. That'll be my next pilot iteration workshop. All right, and I'll give 4 more internet seconds, see if there's any more questions before moving forward. All right, so we've experienced iterative development, or at least observed it. Next, we're going to discuss where it falls in the process improvement cycle. All right, so you've learned about pilots, but where do they fall in the process improvement event cycle? So I acknowledge there may be hundreds of people in the call today. We all may be in different lean journeys, and we may do process improvement a little bit differently. So this may be your first exposure to lean and have maybe never participated in an event. So I'll be providing an improvement event scenario, an example of where pilots can be used within the process improvement event. If you use a different process or different high-level steps, you can think about where a pilot would fall in your improvement process that you use at your respective organization. So if you have never participated in a process improvement event, process improvement events are short-term activities. For me, they range from 3 to 5 days, usually a week long. And this is where a team comes together to make process changes or workspace changes to achieve a targeted goal. Some common high-level steps are provided in the example on the screen, and I'll also go through them. So we start with setting goals and or defining a problem statement or opportunity, or at least the direction we're heading. In the next high-level step, we review our current state. Teams may perform activities such as documenting our current state processes, collecting baseline data, or collecting feedback from our customers. In the next step, we define our new state or develop a plan for our new state. In this step, teams start developing their plan, and they also begin to make tangible changes. So in a process improvement event, it's just not a plan to make a plan. We start making changes during that week. Activities in this stage include creating or revising operating procedures, or maybe changing your workspace layout, creating new tooling, things like that. Once these activities are completed, defining the new state or developing the plan, this is a great opportunity to pilot the new workspaces or processes. So this is a great time to use pilots during your improvement events. You can test out your new operating procedures with the person who was not involved in the planning or in the event. Do the steps make sense to them? How long did it take them to complete the steps? Did it work better or faster than what you had before in your current state? Is another iteration needed before final implementation? If any changes are needed, you go ahead and go back to defining the state, developing the plan step, and make those changes and retest it if needed. And once again, check to see, did the product improve? And once the pilot has been run enough times where you're confident in it, or if that week is up, as long as there are no defects, it's time to implement the improvement. So piloting may seem like a natural step to take, but I can tell you from my personal experience, there were plenty of times where I didn't pilot the improvements before implementation. I was once in an event where we modified process step, but we didn't test out our procedure. We waited until the following week when we went back to the work floor. At that time, we'd find out about all the process bugs that we could have tested out during the week of our improvement event. So by that time, we were already back in our day jobs, back on the floor. And at that point, there was pressure to get the day job done and less support to get the process improvements done. So needless to say, for that event, our improvement was abandoned, overcome by work. So it's a really good example of using that pilot in the event of the process improvement event to test out your things before moving it to the floor. All right, next, prototypes. So similar to what we reviewed in the previous slide, following those same high-level steps, we can also leverage prototyping. And again, prototypes are early model versions of products or representations of a proposed solution. So again, going through those steps, setting the goal, defining the problem opportunity, designing with the end in mind, or at least direction. The next step, review the current state. After that, defining the new state, developing the plan. And in the next step, instead of piloting, do that prototype testing, do the feedback and get the adjustments. For an example for this one of prototyping, I was once working with the team that was in charge of material, and they wanted to start using a portable scanner to check items in and out versus signing items in and out like on a paper sign-in sheet. So we were just in this week of the process improvement event. We were not in a point where we could like fund a scanner or talk about IT integrations or even like procure a scanner. But what we could do during that event week was leverage existing technology. So for that event week, we gathered information on what it was that the team wanted to do with the scanner, and we tried to replicate it with a different technology. So one feature that they wanted to do with the scanner was scan an employee badge and have that info auto-populate into a system, into a screen, versus the employee having to write down their name and phone number on this piece of paper. So what we ended up doing is we just used an Excel spreadsheet to replicate the feature and capability. So even though we didn't have the scanner, we could do a time study to see how long it took for people to write down their info versus how long it took if Excel auto-populated the information. The comparison, the information helped provide the data to build the new business case to support procuring new technology, or at least not using paper. When the team showed the prototype to other team members, they also learned about other features, such as maybe auto-populating the employee supervisor names and supervisor phone numbers. So again, we're able to leverage prototyping to get data, to get others engaged and involved, and gain momentum for the change. All right. I've shared a couple of lessons learned when it comes to pilots and prototypes. I'm also going to offer a couple of mindful practices. So to strengthen your process improvement ideas, remember to use IDEA. So in this case, IDEA stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. Be mindful of voices that may be missing from the planning phases and think about how they can be included within the improvement cycle. I used to work in an industrial environment, and sometimes getting the opportunity to work with the mechanic and get their input and insight was challenging, especially early in our lean journey as an organization. Supervisors were hesitant to pull a mechanic from a job because they thought that meant time away from the job site and getting the job done. Other time, we had team members that maybe had experienced some personal bias because they did used to do that job that we were improving. So when it came to improvements, they didn't need to get additional input, well, because they used to be a mechanic and they already knew what the issue was and they already knew how to fix it. So not only did they miss the opportunity to engage others, but maybe they were missing relevant data and how things may have changed since they were on a mechanic doing that job. A quick example of equity is from the medical field. I went to a process improvement conference in San Diego this year, and there was a presentation on equity in medical devices that illustrates why equity or IDEA is so important to include. So a study was provided on oxygen readers, and you might have used one before. It's a little device that they clip onto your fingertip, and it measures your blood oxygen saturation and your pulse rate. Blood oxygen saturation is the percentage of oxygen in your red blood cells that are carrying oxygen from your lungs to the rest of your body. A normal oxygen level is usually 90% or higher, and low is considered below 92%. The critical level is when blood oxygen level is 88% or lower. So during this session, the presenters provided information on the inequities with this device. When it came to people with different skin tones, the device would read at different levels. And if you had a darker skin tone, the device was less accurate. So when it comes to like the percentages for an oxygen, especially being that close, the difference in the accuracy was really important. And in the case of blood oxygen, it is a matter of life and death. So this was a good reminder for me to consider the needs of different audiences and how equipment may operate differently for different people. It's also important to test equipment across different populations as well. So a link to the study is provided in the slide deck, but I've also included a QR code for those that may want to access it right away. Oh, and then there may be a question in the Q&A. I'm just going to pause.
Hi, Jennifer. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. One question is asking if the prototype is a tool within the pilot.
Can I get the question one more time?
Yeah, the question is the prototype a tool within the broader pilot, or is it something separate?
Okay, so as a lean tool, the prototype can be a tool within the pilot. If you want to try something, a baking example, maybe I wanted to try something that frosted a little bit better. So maybe I included that in my process. So definitely the prototype can be a new tool within the pilot, within testing out your new process. Absolutely.
Great. And another question is saying that in their agency, a pilot is often like a year long and usually with a grant or contractor. Do you have any advice on how to frame this in a way that for agencies that might be different to kind of thinking about a pilot differently, how they can kind of think about a pilot in smaller applications?
And if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm writing it down so I could see the questions. Okay. So let's see. If you have a year-long pilot, how to leverage the steps that we talked about today, I would think for a year-long project, breaking down the wins into smaller chunks, and I'd be curious about what that looks like. So for an example, I like to say, I volunteer for a PB organization, and my husband was the athletic coordinator for baseball, which made me like the executive assistant to the athletic coordinator. But he had like a big vision to make improvements in the PB organization. So he had a year to do it. So we thought about making the improvements to the field, like what are all those small targets that you want to hit? So instead of piloting everything at once, which was a new field, a new batting cage, new dugouts, thinking about those things in smaller chunks as smaller targets and seeing how those things work separately and then seeing how they work together. So I think looking at your smaller targets. What can you achieve? How can you see them get implemented? How can you test them? Just do the smallest thing that you can, test it, see if it works, and run it again.
Thank you. And so, kind of piggybacking off of that, if you're in an organization where pilots typically mean big projects and you want to do a pilot at a smaller scale, how might you frame that to your leadership? Because if you just use the word like, hey, I want to do a pilot, they might think that it's something a lot bigger than what you're proposing. So, how can you kind of communicate pilots on a small scale to organizations who are used to using that in context of a broad scale?
Okay. So I would think maybe do some rebranding. So not use the pilot, but maybe come with, hey, I want to try a little experiment, or I want to try storm this idea. Maybe use different language that gives the mental model of something a little bit smaller. And then also come with some time frames as well. Hey, I know in the past we've done a pilot that's a year-long thing. In this case, I just want to try and storm this this idea. It only take a week, or like in our case, it only take 30 minutes, but whatever that time frame is, and also offer that with that. So they don't have the mental model of this year-long effort.
Great. And we have one more question in the chat. Due to the waterfall decision making in state government, we are often financially invested in a process change before the pilot is even started. So, in the event of the pilot failing or not meeting expectations or solving the issue, how would you pivot or communicate that to management?
All right, so waterfall,
Yeah, so I think
waterfall.
they're saying that oftentimes agencies commit to the whole thing before they even know if it's going to work. So, what do you do in circumstances where you've already dumped money in, but then maybe your pilot shows that it's not going to work as intended?
Perfect. So I was going to say a little bit about waterfall for people that are new. Waterfall is different than iterative development. It's usually a longer term process, and you go through longer steps to bring your idea to fruition. It's just a little bit short there. So when it comes to waterfall versus iterative development, I think that is definitely the benefit of iterative development. And waterfall does work for different scenarios. So use it wherever it works. So when it comes to committing, allowing the ability to learn. If you do come to the end of a long project, if it is a year long, and if it didn't work, that's okay. And I'm going to talk about this in my next slide as well. But nurture the environment of learning and experimentation. And maybe in this case, sinking the investment of 1 year's time and 1 year's worth of budget is better than sinking in 5 years worth of time and 5 years worth of budget. So maybe in this point, perspective is important. That's all I've got. Knowing what I know.
Thank you. I think that's really important.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, so last, and this definitely is a great segue from that. Pilot what you have instead of waiting for that the end of the year. If you use waterfall, what can you pilot shorter term? What can you pilot within a month? What can you pilot within a week? And try it out, even if you have to simulate it. And again, nurture the environment of experimentation or learning. When it comes to pilots and prototypes, not everything is going to be a success, and that's the benefit of running them. You get to learn, you make adjustments, you learn what not to do, and then you fail fast, succeed sooner, but learn even faster. And as a leader, provide the environment for your team to experiment and protect them from maybe people that will come and be like, hey, I told you it wasn't going to work, or, hey, what are we doing? But really provide the time, the support, and the freedom to innovate and challenge the status quo. and just recognize that a failure is going to happen, and that's how we learn. Let's see, my last, I'm looking at time here. So my favorite lean related clip in a pilot comes from the movie The Founder. If you've never seen this film, the film tells the story of the rise of McDonald's. It's a fast food restaurant chain if you've never heard of it. And again, another food example. But without giving too much away in the movie, the clip shows how the kitchen set up. And Flo was piloted using a tennis court as the testing environment. So again, this was a great example. Maybe it was going to be a year or two out before they built a building, but they used what they had to test and learn. And again, this link is going to be provided in the deck. A QR code is provided for immediate access. And all this comes to, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. Try what you have, learn. If it doesn't work, take what's good and keep moving forward. All right, I made time. Any last questions?
Yes, we have one more last question. If the pilot you envision involves a commitment or like a purchase by the public, in other words, a public product of sorts, do you recommend finding a way to involve the public but cover their costs in the pilot?
Can I get that one more time?
Yeah. So if the pilot you envision involves a commitment or like a purchase by the public, in other words, a public product of sorts, do you recommend finding a way to involve the public but cover their costs in the pilot? So I think they're saying if you're using public funds for a public product, maybe you want to involve the public in that process, but should you be covering their costs of participating in the pilot?
So first, I'm going to give the legally defendable answer. Is make sure and go to your legal team to make sure to do what's legally responsible and also what's ethically required, especially since this is a Washington State event. So I'll start with that. I think definitely from a change management perspective, and also looking at it from the perspective of being a taxpayer, absolutely involve the public in the decision making, but also engage them in providing the solution as well, especially if the public is going to be the person that uses the solution. And also goes back to the IDEA. Is your solution going to work for people of different demographics, for people of different housing statuses, different genders? So my gut, I don't know exactly what the scenario is, but definitely involve the public. And when it comes to the funding, do what's fiscally responsible and legally responsible. Whatever we can do to involve the public and offer transparency, I think is best, especially when working in public service.
Great answer. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for this presentation today. Based on the feedback that we're getting, I know that it was really valuable for folks to really dive deep into understanding what a pilot is and how it can help your project. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. We had over 400 attendees in this presentation, which is wonderful. There's a lot more conference to come. We've got another session today at 3 o'clock, and we've got another 2 days of sessions. So if you want to revisit sessions, feel free to access our website. We're getting those loaded up as quickly as possible. And feel free to download copies of the presenter materials from our website as well. And sign up for any additional sessions that you might be interested in. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and hope to see you again at 3.